Hello, my name is Laurel Rutledge. I am the CEO of LaurelRutledge.com, the creator of the Rutledge Perspective podcast, and now I am the host of the Rutledge Perspective on KCOH TV, The Boost, and I am so excited. My background in human resources and also in business and consulting has given me the opportunity to share information with all of you, and what we're going to do is talk about the foundational pieces, whether or not you're building a business or you're building a career. It all comes down to strategy and people. If you don't know where you're going, how do you know who needs to be on your team? So please join me, join in the conversation, catch the show both on the radio, on the app, and also on Facebook. And I will be on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you there. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is Tuesday, my favorite day. Woo-hoo. Talk It Out Tuesday. And so those of y'all who are watching my live got to see me almost lose my camera. So that's why we call it live. So today we are going to be talking about performance management and accountability. And given what we all saw this weekend, I thought it was a good time to be talking about accountability. Cool. Yeah. So before I do that, PSA time. So in Texas, y'all, you need to be registered to vote by June 15th. June 15th. If you are not registered, I'm already mad at you. But if you are not registered, I'm gonna give you some grace until you go get registered. And most of the offices, I think, are still closed, so you need to register by mail. You cannot register to vote online. You need to register by mail. So please go get registered to vote. The deadline is June 15th because we do have some runoffs, primary runoffs. So please go get registered. Hey, Marcia. Maryland, my friend Melissa posted on Facebook the other day for Maryland. They were supposed to be sending out, I guess, mail-in ballots in Maryland. Their primary is June 2nd, I believe. And there was some issue with the mail out. Everybody was supposed to be getting one. People didn't get them. You were supposed to then have received them by May 22nd, which was last Friday. So if you're in Maryland and you have not received your ballot, you need to call somebody. Call the election office or something, but you need to check on your ballot. This week, I'm doing another Taking the Panic Out of Pandemic webinar. It's almost a redo, sort of the first one I did. So there's going to be an attorney on there and someone who is a disaster recovery expert. And I'm doing this one because, yes, in most cases, people are already kind of opening back up and figuring out how we're going to move forward. But there's still a lot of people who haven't quite opened up or are opening up but still having some challenges. So we're going to talk about some of the things you still need to think about in opening up. And some things to prepare for. And given, what we saw this weekend, we just might all be on lockdown again. So I'm just saying it's a good time to regroup and prepare again. So that's happening Thursday. It's 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central. You can register at don'tpanic.laurelrutledge.com. It is free. I just need to know who's coming so I can lock the meeting. So we don't get Zoom bombed. And by the way, sometimes if you have Firefox or Safari, so if you're on a Mac, the link tells you that it's like not a good page or it's pretending to be a different page or something. It gives you this funny error. But if you type in don'tpanic.laurelrutledge.com, like in the bar in the top, you should be able to get to it. So one way or the other. I have my people working on that. I got my people working on that to see what's going on. I'm having mask issues again today. So that's going on with the webinar. Then in June, so in a few weeks, I'm going to be announcing the opening up of an online resource that I put together quite a while ago. And it's got about 30 different modules in it, and I call it the resource. And it's HR for small businesses, and it's a membership. So you just go in, you can get to any of these little modules, anywhere from talking about your strategy all the way through things you need to think about if you're going to separate somebody. And I've got some downloadable stuff that's free that you can just download. You can change it however you want it. That's interview packets, or it's how to do performance management, some like feedback forms, all that kind of stuff. So I'll be announcing that soon too. And again, that'll be a membership thing. So for those of you who are small business owners, don't have access to an HR person, just need something so you know at least what to do, so you try to stay as much out of trouble as you can, then that'll be there, and I'll let you guys know. Good morning, Miss Young, Mama Young in Austin, Texas. So we got Houston and Austin.
New York said they're voting by, New York State is voting by mail.
Oh, awesome. Okay, y'all, listen to that. New York State is voting by mail. Cuz, what's up? My cousin Jonathan. Woohoo! So New York is voting by mail. That's awesome. So please, y'all, just register. Don't let somebody take your voice. And this is not political on which party. I don't care. I just want everybody to vote. Just vote. Just vote. Okay.
When you said that, because it was a question posed on Facebook by a Facebook friend of mine, and because of what Biden said or whatever, now people are saying they don't know what they're going to do or if they're going to vote. By not voting, that is voting, correct?
By not voting, you are voting. You are saying that, one, you're saying I don't care enough to vote.
Okay.
But two, if you are not voting, then you are casting your vote for whoever has, who may have the opportunity to win just because everybody else is silent. You see what I mean? So don't lose your vote.
You got to vote. The lesser of two evils, whatever.
You got to vote. Just vote. Okay. And here's the deal. When people say that, I don't know what to do. What did Biden say? Now I don't know what to do. Here's what I'm going to say. We are not sheep. We are not sheep. Somebody else should not be telling you how to vote in the first place.
That's right.
Go read. Go do your research. Go find out what's on your ballot. Go, especially local ones too. It's not just the presidential primaries, y'all. It starts local. So please, please, please go out and educate yourself. What are the issues that are important to you? Go read and see what people's positions are, and go back years. If they've been in the public for a while, go back and see, have they changed, right? How recent have they changed? What are the things that they've done? So you want to make sure that you educate yourself. Don't let somebody else tell you how to vote without you educating yourself on what your vote is, right? That to me, that is one of my biggest pet peeves. And especially in local races where we have all those amendments and stuff that come up and all those referendums, you usually can get a copy of the ballot early. Go and read it. And here's the deal. When they talk about voter suppression and reforming and all this kind of stuff, I'd like to reform the way we do ballots and reform the way that we write, amendments and referendums and stuff. Why? Because they are written in a way that people can't understand them. So for example, we had an issue here a couple of elections ago about pay for firefighters. That was just one of them. But when you got ready to vote for that, you had to scroll to 2 pages to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to do that. Nobody is going to do that. And so here's what happens. Right, wrong, or indifferent, the people who write that know people aren't going to read. So they write it in a way that's complicated.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of legalese in it. They write it in a way that's complicated, and they write it in a way that can be confusing. The other one was about the state income tax for Texas. Remember that? That was the last one. Oh, you should vote. If you vote no, it means yes. If you vote yes, it means all that madness. When if you went back and read and actually saw what was going on, the reality is we already have a constitutional amendment, the Bullock Amendment, that says you cannot have a state income tax in Texas. It's already there.
Wow.
So this wasn't even about that. This was about the definition of what a person meant. It had to do with big businesses versus small businesses, sole proprietors, all that kind of stuff. But see, people don't read, and then they put up commercials that say, if you vote yes, you mean no, and if you vote no, you mean yes. Stop it. Stop it. We are not sheep, people. Go out, read for yourself. Figure out what you want to vote for, who you want to vote for, and why, and then go do that. But register first, by June 15th in Texas. Okay. I think that's everything for the public service announcements. I'll get off my soapbox now around voting, but please vote. So today we are going to be talking about performance management and accountability. I'm just fidgety today. I don't know what my issue is.
I don't know. Like, why is she moving so much?
I don't know. I don't know what my problem is today. Y'all just overlook me. Hopefully more people are listening than looking. So I want to talk about performance management because there's a big piece of performance management that's about accountability. Both accountability on the leader's side who is conducting performance reviews and on the person who is performing. Everybody's accountable in the process. And
what is happening, and as we're seeing it now, I saw something posted today, you know, the wearing of masks, the social distancing, all this kind of stuff is not about you. It's about the other person. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about performance management, the key I tell people is it's not about the person, it's about the behavior. And that's where it gets kind of all messed up because it gets personal. And unless someone is really doing something like touching somebody or stealing something or something like that, it's really not about the person and your judgment on whether or not that person is a good person or a bad person. That is completely irrelevant. Mm-hmm. What is relevant is what were the expectations that were set that the person was supposed to be doing? How were they supposed to be performing? What were the measures put in place? What kind of conversations were had to make sure that everybody understood the measures? And then how did the person perform against those measures? And what are you going to do about it? It's pretty simple. But what happens is leaders, less strong leaders, new leaders, leaders who have a hard time communicating, leaders who don't like to give bad news or be clear, because remember I said very early, it is not unkind to be clear.
Right.
Those are the leaders that end up having issues and people get surprised in their performance reviews. If there is a surprise in a performance review, that is on the leader. That is not on the person. The leader messed up. Because nothing in a performance review should be a surprise. Nothing. Especially when someone is not meeting expectations. That should not be a surprise. If it's a surprise, you as the leader, you are accountable for that. You are both responsible and accountable for that. That's on you. That is not on the other person. So let me be clear. If there is something that comes up in a performance review that is a surprise, that is the fault of the leader, not the fault of the person. Does that make sense?
Say it again.
If something shows up in a performance review and the person who is being reviewed is surprised, that is the fault of the leader, not the fault of the person who is being reviewed.
Is it because there should have been some meetings or warnings?
Some conversation, some meetings, some indications, some regular measures. Someone shouldn't understand that they failed when you see them at their end of year review.
Okay, gotcha.
Because they didn't just fail that day. They've been failing to perform for a period of time, and you as a leader have failed to say something. That's on you. And so I can't tell you how many times as an HR person where we'd have leaders come to us, especially senior HR people, because normally our teams would work with somebody and then it would get nobody would agree, and then it ultimately get rolled up to us. And we come into these conversations where you had a very senior leader who's like, I want to get rid of this person. They just haven't been performing and it's just bad, and we just gotta get rid of them. And my first question is, okay, well, have you told them? Yes. When? And let me see the documentation. And 9 times out of 10, there is nothing until the very last minute that says, oh yeah, this person's gotta go. Now, I'm not talking about the stuff that's egregious. I'm not talking about somebody who has, been stealing a ton of money, or I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about regular performance, sometimes over years. And then all of a sudden, a manager decides, yeah, I'm tired today, so they got to go. I'm sorry. You've been living with it for 10 years. Guess what? You get to live with that a little bit longer.
Is it illegal to do that?
It is not illegal. It is highly risky. Yeah. Because, again, especially in Texas, and any right to work state, you can terminate somebody for any reason or for no reason at all, with or without cause. You can do that. What you're managing is your risk. So if you have nothing documented that supports why you made that decision, that's where it ends up being a problem. Not necessarily illegal. It's just that it may not be defensible. So you may end up writing a check. A big check.
But we see that now, even in Washington. If you get mad, you can just fire somebody. But that's legal. There's nothing that can be done to stop that.
Now, what's interesting in Washington is you're not seeing people go back and make claims of wrongful termination. That's what happens. So that's why I say you have to have documentation. You have to have shown that you've been having this conversation for a while, because, if you can prove that you've been talking about this, this is not new, then it's more likely that you're going to be able to say, no, we've had this conversation. We talked about this. This is not new. This person was aware. Here's the documentation. Here's where they signed it. Here's where we had the conversation. So when they try to say you wrongfully terminated them, you at least have documentation that says, no. Here's all the stuff that we did. Here's the stuff we did in good faith as an employer that made sure they understood what the expectations were, that made sure they understood this is why we're making this decision, that made sure they understood the consequences and what they needed to do to fix it. So you have at least some grounds to defend your action. The challenge is if you just decide you're tired and you just make it happen, especially if you've been putting it up with it for 10 years.
Okay, now that things have changed in a COVID situation, let's say the leader found out, let's say it's a church, and they've been doing online church, and they found out now they no longer need the minister of music, and he was getting like $500 a week. Can they just say, we no longer need you, and that's okay?
That's different.
Okay.
That's different, yeah. Because that's not a performance issue. That's a business decision. That's a business decision. Because the way we do business has changed, therefore this particular resource is no longer needed.
Okay.
That's a kind of a different process. If you're trying to terminate somebody and you want to say we are terminating this person for performance, you need to be able to show it really is a performance issue.
Because that's what happened with I don't know, I forgot the lady's name, but that was in the park and they were filming her walking this dog. She lost her job. So can they do that? Is that a performance issue or is that something
it depends. Because I don't remember that one. If she was...
That was just recently, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so here's the thing. And Carlsbad, California's on. Good morning, Carlsbad. So here's the deal. So for example, let's say someone says, I'm afraid to come to work. I need to work at home. I'm not ready, or I'm quarantined, or whatever. And for whatever reason, you might be concerned. And so you find out that the person is actually working another job, or they're out running every day, or whatever. You see them out all the time. They're out walking their dog. Anything that's unreasonable, right? Then you might have grounds to say, look, you said, this is what you said you needed and this is why. But now we have evidence that that's not what you're doing. So therefore we have kind of a disconnect here.
Gotcha.
So it's time for you to come to work. And when you see that most often, you don't see that a lot in this situation. At least I haven't heard of it. But you do see that situation a lot around performance management and bringing people back or terminating people around things like workers' compensation. So somebody will be injured on the job. So they have a back injury. And we've had this I've had over my career, I've had some of these things happen. They have a
question from Elaine Cook, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
What about a servant's pay used as hush money? I've experienced that with previous standards was the issue. That's really interesting. So if you look at severance agreements or termination agreements, separation agreements, often they have a clause in there that says you won't tell anybody, or you're signing a release, or there's language in there that essentially says you agree not to, as a result of getting this money, you agree not to sue the organization. That is a lot of times in separation agreements, in severance agreements. It's consideration that because they're giving you money, they can ask you for something. Now, you don't have to sign anything. So if someone's giving you, especially a severance agreement, and most release agreements as well, you generally have initially 7 days to review and have it reviewed with a lawyer. And then, at least in Texas, you have like 21 days to then change your mind. So even if you sign it, you can change your mind and say no. And even if you sign something that says you will not sue the company for whatever reason for this termination, you cannot be forced to sign away your rights under EEO. So you could still make a claim for discrimination, for harassment, for whatever under EEO, even if you sign something under a severance agreement, because you cannot sign away your rights to an EEO claim. Hopefully that made sense. I think so. Here's another good one. Good morning, Rick. It says, what about eliminating the position when performance was not an issue, but personality standards was the issue?
So one of the things we've talked about a lot is I want you guys to be really clean. Really clean. If you need to eliminate a position, eliminate the position. So you need to make that decision first. We no longer need this position, so we are going to eliminate XYZ position. Then you go through a process, at least if there is more than one person, that says, okay, which of these people is no longer going to have a position? And you need to go through a process, work with the legal counsel, work with an HR person that says, this is non-discriminatory. So you can't just automatically say, we're gonna terminate the person that is here the least amount of time. Or we're gonna terminate the person that was here the longest amount of time because we paid them more money. or any of those things that are protected, right? Anything that's going to be age, race, sexual orientation, any of those things that are protected, you cannot make a decision to terminate somebody based on one of those things. Now, if there has been a challenge around performance, personality issues, they don't fit, and you're eliminating a position, and you have documented performance, you absolutely can have that be a piece. But you just need to be really careful that you haven't decided to eliminate the position because you want to eliminate the person. And I'm telling you, that will come out in a deposition because they will sue. You will be in a deposition. Their attorney will ask you a lot of questions and they will catch you. They will catch you. So be real and be clear that we are eliminating this position and then we're going to decide who the person is.
It was said the contract was not executed. They fought to get my signature, but I walked away with integrity.
Yeah, you don't have to sign anything ever.
Okay.
Ever, never, ever, never. Ever. You don't have to sign. There are consequences to not signing. So a lot of times if you don't sign the severance agreement, you may not get the severance pay.
Really?
Yeah. Depending on where you are, a signature may be required in order to get the pay. Now, you know.
Did you get the pay? I want to know.
Right. So it depends on where you are. It depends on the company. It depends on the industry. That kind of thing. So like in California, I don't know if they can hold your pay if you don't sign. No, in California, probably not. But in the webinar, we're going to talk about some of that stuff. So webinar on Thursday, because we have an attorney. The attorney this time is from California. So you are never required. Even performance reviews, you're not required to sign your performance review. But if you'll notice, companies got smart because what old performance reviews used to say, this signature acknowledges that I agree with this review, which you might not agree with the review.
Right, right.
So what they've done is gotten smart and changed it and said, this signature acknowledges that I received this review. And if you don't agree with it, there is nothing that says you cannot add an addendum or make notes or whatever on that review and make sure you get a copy of it before you sign it and say, these are the things I don't agree with, this is why, right? So you don't, just because someone is giving you a paycheck doesn't mean you give up all of your rights, folks. There are a lot of things that companies can do because they are paying you and because they make the rules. But you have choices. You have choices.
She said she got the check.
Well, there you go.
Okay. That's good.
So you don't always have to sign. You just need to know which state is in. Make sure you seek counsel. Anytime you get an agreement, that's a severance agreement, a separation agreement, an employment agreement, even if you're getting ready to take a job, I highly, highly suggest you have an expert look at it. I highly suggest you have an expert look at it because there are a few areas that are really important. There's areas around intellectual property.
Yeah.
So if you are especially in something that's a creative venue, if you're a chemist, if you're an engineer, if you're a place where you're doing R&D, and there's an intellectual property clause, you want to make sure you understand what that means. Does that mean that if you develop something and you design it and it's all your stuff in your brain, do they own it? Does your name get on it? What does that mean? You just really need to know that. So intellectual property is one. Non-solicitation and non-disclosure is another one. Those basically say you can't, once you leave, you can't go out and ask other people at that company to come join you for a certain period of time.
Okay.
Or you can't solicit customers. Those are actually reasonable, right? It's a going concern, but you want to make sure that they are not, you can't, we have a non-disclosure and non-solicitation for 3 years. That's crazy, right? Because all of the case law has said it's got to be a reasonable amount of time. And reasonable, what we're seeing is anywhere from 12 to 18 months has been able to be defended. Because after 18 months, the perspective is after 18 months, there's been so much that's changed in the organization that you probably don't know the details anyway. So what damage could you do to the organization, right? After 18 months. So that's another one, non-disclosure, non-discrimination. The other one you want to look at is if there's anything around there around severance, because sometimes, especially executive contracts, will have agreements around severance. They'll have agreements around pay. They'll have agreements around stock options, that kind of stuff. You just want to have everything looked at. You want to have everything looked at. And you want to make sure, and I say read these too, in any kind of, like Uber, Lyft, any kind of agreement that you have with the service is forced arbitration or indemnification. So if they force you to go to mandatory arbitration, which means you don't get to sue, you have to go find a mediator. And most likely they pick the mediator. And they pick the state where it's going to be mediated. And you have to go to mediation if you have a dispute. So any kind of agreement, just make sure you get an expert who is looking out for your best interest to look at it before you sign it. And then you can always negotiate. They may say yes, they may say no, but don't just take everything at face value.
She said non-compete didn't get executed either, so I took the business that I built.
Yes, non-competes, that's under kind of that non-solicitation, non-disclosure. Non-competes are huge. And again, they usually are not defensible beyond about 12 to 18 months, depending on what kind of role you're in. Because again, let's say you're in a really specified field and they're like, well, you can't go, because let's just say I know someone who worked at a company. This company no longer did it and nobody signed it, by the way. Really big global company that decided they wanted everybody to sign these non-competes. And the non-compete had this language in it that said, if you leave or when you leave, you cannot work for any organization in the same industry as us. Now, and I think it was 18 months. No and no. And the person that told me about it, I said, you absolutely will not sign that. You absolutely will not sign that. That is non-defensible. So you're going to close out an entire industry for somebody who may have their whole career there, that may be their specific skill set. No. And nobody signed and they had to change it. And this is a huge global company. So that's why I say, just be careful. Pay attention. Okay? Don't just sign stuff just because somebody puts it in front of you, because you don't have to. Okay. So, any more questions? We'll get back to, okay. So back to performance management. So on the leadership side, as we've talked about a number of times, especially now that we're going back to work, and some people are going to be working at home. Some people are going to be working different shifts. Some people are going to be working modified shifts. I mean, there's so much change going on. As a leader, you are responsible for setting up parameters for how this is going to work. It's on you. The company will have some things that you guys need to do, and hopefully your leaders are talking about it. But for your department, you need to be really clear on how work needs to be performed and how you're going to measure that, because it may change now. And people need to understand. So you are responsible and accountable for clarity for your people in this new age. How are we going to do work? How are we going to measure it? How is it going to be reviewed? How often are we going to review it? All of those kind of things. And encourage your people, if they are confused or they don't know what's going on or they may need some help, encourage them to ask for a meeting, right? But you as the leader, it is your responsibility to make sure people understand. Here's what's going to happen. Here's how we're going to work through it. Here's how you're going to be measured. If there's still going to be bonuses this year, here's how we're going to do bonuses if the payout has changed. Here's how we're going to measure how you did. Because if people have not been working at home, you haven't been able to see them. Although given what's been happening with Zoom, you've probably been talking to people more than you ever did when they were sitting in an office right across from you. So make sure that you understand and that your people understand very clearly what you're measuring them on and how you're measuring them. And then make sure that that is something that is tangible and non-discriminatory. So here are the things that have to get done in the quality and in the timing that they need to get done. And then you measure against those. You put milestones in place. You put check-ins in place. It's really important to do those things so that people are clear. And you as a leader, I'm hearing this more and more, because the good thing about the situation we're in now is there are a lot of people who are showing up to be phenomenal leaders. Phenomenal leaders. Those who were bad leaders before are bad or worse leaders now.
Why so?
Because they're having to step up. And crises uncover or put in the forefront gaps. So if you had a hard time communicating clearly before, you are certainly having a hard time now. Because nobody's sitting in front of you. Nobody's coming to your office. Nobody's necessarily picking up the phone. Nobody's forcing you to communicate with them necessarily. So it's easier for you to just stay in your hole, right? And be comfortable. So if you were bad at it before, you should have more reason to communicate better now. But there's a lot of ways and reasons why you don't have to. Because just like you can't see your people every day because they're not sitting in front of you, your bosses can't see you either. Your people can't see you. They can't see your face. They can't see, they're only hearing your tone unless you're doing Zoom or Skype or GoToMeeting or whatever your thing of choice is. So as leaders, those who were not good before are showing not good now.
That's true.
They're showing not good now. And this is also a time, there's so much pressure on HR people right now. This is also a time for HR people and talent leaders. When you have those people that you probably have known all along were poor leaders, this is a great time to really jump on that bandwagon and really get clear about this is what's happening and this is the consequence of us not having addressed this issue before. So let's talk about how we're going to put a plan in place to get this person the skills that they need, or determine they just can't do it, or won't, because there's a difference between a can't and a won't, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Can't I'll work with all day long. Won't, that's a different discussion. So leaders, you're accountable. Make sure people are clear. Make sure people understand. Make sure people, as you're reopening, schools now are reopening. It is going to be so important. Oh my gosh. It's going to be so important for the leaders of universities, of elementary schools, of kindergarten, of daycares to be really clear about their expectations and the performance that's needed to get through this next period. Not only clear about the plan, but clear about performance, right? Because now that teachers have had to do lesson plans differently, now that they've had to do stuff on Zoom, are they going to have half and half? How are you going to measure them on that? Are they going to do some online? Are they going to do some in person? What's more important? What are the lesson plans different? Put yourself in the place of that teacher, that professor, that instructor. How do you make it clear? How do you make it doable and reasonable? And then how do you communicate that and measure against it? You've got to take the time to be really clear about that. Really clear about that.
Says this will force a change in leadership and cultural expectations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much more now needed of leaders around their communication, around their compassion, around transparency. It was always there. It was always there. But now it's even more critical.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Now it's even more critical to do that and to be clear and to be on your game around your communication and what you expect of people and how you're going to measure people, and then be consistent. Be consistent, because people are worried, they're afraid, they're confused, they're all those things that are reasonable, because it's different. Times are different, and so nobody really knows what to expect. So you've got to set the expectations.
And that's true, because I had to have that conversation, because at this point sometimes you may not know how it's going to work out. Just as you and I are talking now, we're doing something we've never had to do before.
Right.
And that's both have one mask. Even when I went to go drink some water just a minute ago, I looked to make sure you didn't have one. I'm like, girl, just take your mask off, I want to drink no water.
Right.
But it's a lot of moving parts now that you
Yeah.
have to be clear to people and say, this is where we are. This has to be in place first. I know you're ready to come back, but we don't have certain things in place to assure that everybody will be safe. Right.
And you have to have the courage to do that. And and if you're in an organization where your leaders are not being clear, so this kind of morphs into your responsibility as an individual, even if you're not a leader. If you're in an organization where the leaders aren't being clear, and I don't mean that they have every I dotted and every T crossed, because there's so much stuff moving, things are going to be missed. So everybody needs to give people a little bit of grace. We keep seeing these posts about just be kind. Just be kind to people. Just be kind. It doesn't cost you anything to be kind. Just be kind. So there are going to be things missed. There are mistakes that are going to be made. It's just, this is a new deal. There is no plan for this. And it is also a time to be courageous. And you don't have to be ugly to be candid. But this is a time to be speaking truth to power. So HR people, if you see stuff where there are big gaps, they're not considering certain things for people, how are we going to change pay? How are we going to make sure this makes sense? If you're seeing that, say something. Say something. You can be, because I know a lot of them. You should not be in an HR position without courage.
Yes.
Let me say that one more time. You should not be in an HR position without courage. And that doesn't mean you're being nasty. That doesn't mean you're being ugly. That doesn't mean it's your own agenda. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, you need to understand just as much, we talked about this before, you need to understand the business as much as the business people. Where are we going? Why are we going there? What do we need to get there? And then you need to understand the people piece of it. What are the things that our people are worried about? What are the things they're concerned about? What are the things that I'm seeing? And you need to be able to marry those two things and speak truth to power. If the organization's actions and words are not matched, you must say something. And don't just call it out and say, well, we're not doing the right thing. And here's where we're not doing the right thing. We're not doing the right thing. This is where we're not doing the right thing. Call it out. And here's what I suggest we do, or at least consider. Come with a solution. But you cannot sit blind because you are also accountable.
That's good. 2 questions. How will cultural competency and sensitive training be impacted?
That's a really good question. One of the things that I'm seeing, especially if you look at the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, DEI. So it's not just diversity inclusion anymore. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you look at that space now, there is a heightened sensitivity, especially around cultural training, with respect to the Asia Pacific region, Pacific Islanders, those kinds of things, because people are being nasty against someone they assume is of Asian heritage because of where COVID started and all, craziness, right? And so I would not be surprised if there's some increase in cultural sensitivity training that's beyond just your diversity training, but more around unconscious bias, right? What are those things that we are harboring that impact our actions that we may or may not be aware? So the unconscious bias training, the bias training, those kind of things I can see increasing for sure, because we're seeing some of that. And especially those biases now with everybody having masks on, if you don't know who someone is, your biases show up. Your biases show up. So that's a big one. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in an expansion of training around unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity.
Training, as far as going back to work, let's say because I saw Willie G's, they've had to close because the majority of the employees were tested for COVID. Can an employer or a manager govern that? Listen, we need to know where you've been, what you're doing, who you've been in contact with before you come back to work.
So it is, because of the situation that we're in, it is legal to ask questions. Not every question, but it's legal to ask questions. So you can have a questionnaire that says, I have, yes or no, I have tested positive. Yes or no, I have been around someone who has tested positive. Yes or no, and not that I live with someone, but I have been around someone who has tested positive. I myself have been in quarantine, yes or no. So you can ask specific questions around exposure for sure. You can do temperature scans, you can do those things. There are even some businesses that are actually doing some testing. And I would caution you on testing. One, you want to make sure it's an accurate test. But most of the places that are doing testing because you cannot socially distance in that business. So like manufacturing. You got your manufacturing floor set up. You can't just move machines that weigh a ton.
Right.
So it's going to be very hard for you to necessarily socially distance people. So organizations like that are actually testing and getting results of tests before they let people come back to work. And that's reasonable, right? So just make sure if you ever got taken to court that a reasonable person would assume that your questions or your actions are reasonable. It's called the reasonable person test. Okay? So yes, you can ask those questions. You just can't say, did you test positive? Do you live with somebody? Have you been exposed? Have you been quarantined? Have you been in contact with someone who is exposed or quarantined? That kind of thing. You can't ask very, very personal questions, but you can ask to get a sense of the risk with that person. Okay. And as leaders, you are, again, when we know better, we do better. So we know that this is a respiratory illness, that it is spread that way. And so we are accountable for doing everything we can to keep our people safe.
Question with responsibility. We talked about earlier, what happened, what we saw on the news with all the different places that have opened up. There was no social distancing. They were not keeping to the 25%. Is the company just as responsible for, let's say there's a restaurant, it's open and people are packed and they're all on top of each other. Should the company be just as responsible or for allowing that?
One, they should be. And two, according to the rules that we have now, they are, because the rules say 25% capacity. I don't think it's been expanded to 50 yet, has it?
No.
So 25% capacity, which means they are responsible for keeping it at 25% capacity, which means they could potentially be fined or shut down or whatever the consequences are for not following the rules. The question becomes, how is enforcement going to work? And we heard that, at least here in Houston, we heard that today, right? They're going to start having, fire marshals can issue fines and citations and stuff like that for people not following the rules around capacity. So yes, you're responsible. And so if you end up with a fine, but you had your place packed, I don't know what to tell you. Because it said 25, it said 25%. Yeah. So again, we all have choices. So if you choose to not follow that, then you are choosing to take the risk of a fine. Okay. You have a choice to do that. Just understand what that choice means and what the impact of your decision means on not just you, because it's not about you.
And no social distancing, because even in the grocery stores, you have that measure to let you know. So if you're taking orders in a line that you're seeing people are jam-packed in, then you have full knowledge that you're going against what was asked.
I heard a place this morning, I don't even know where it was. I don't know if it was in Texas, I don't know where it was. They were saying they had so many people showing up, they had to shut down several times during the day. They had so many people showing up to their business that they finally said, we can't do this. And they're like, we are so thankful y'all came back, and we are so grateful for the business. Yeah. But we want to be able to stay open, and we don't want our folks to end up being sick, and we don't, all of these kind of things. So, this is interesting times. It is. Interesting times. So leaders, you are responsible and accountable. Now, individuals, when it comes to performance management, if you are not clear on what you think you are supposed to do and how it's going to be measured, you are responsible and accountable for getting clarity. Period. The end. No questions asked. If you don't understand, you need to say something. And so often I would hear people in the end, well, I didn't know that's what they wanted, or I didn't understand. Well, did you ask? Well, no. This is not a time, especially now, to be shy or bashful or ashamed. If you don't know, ask. And if you don't want to ask and say, hey, I don't understand, here's the easy way to do that. Somebody gives you, here's the things that they want you to do. All you have to do is respond in an email. Here is what I understood to be my tasks or my responsibilities or what have you. Send it back in an email. Here is my understanding. Not only have you gone back and clarified what they said, but now you've got it in writing. Easy peasy.
That's good.
Here's what I understood I'm supposed to be doing for this amount of time in this quality. Here are the milestones, blah, blah, blah. Did I get that clear? So you're not saying I don't understand if you're afraid to say I don't understand. I don't have a problem saying I don't understand. Ever. Yeah. And then I figure it out, right? And then I find it out, and then I don't have to not understand that ever again, right? But a lot of people have a challenge saying I don't understand. And there are some company cultures where saying I don't understand could be a challenge. So if you don't want to say I don't understand, then just take what they give you and repeat it. Here's what I understood you to say. Am I clear? Is that clear? Did I get it right?
That's good.
Yes or no? And then you can move forward, right? So then you're just opening up the dialogue and you're getting it documented. Please don't just sit in confusion.
That's good.
Because while it is the responsibility of the leader, if you are surprised by something at the end, ultimately your career and your performance is you. Ultimately, you are responsible for your performance. You're responsible for your career. Nobody is required to give you a job or give you a promotion. And most of us understand that we are not entitled to anything. The only thing companies owe you is the day's pay rate for the day you work. Legally, that's what's owed. Now, if they want to keep you and they want you to be happy, they do all kinds of other stuff, right? But the agreement is this much pay for this much work. That's the agreement.
Right.
Not you're guaranteed this promotion. Now, if you got an employment agreement that guarantees you those things, I am so happy for you. That's awesome.
Now, when you said that, because we know how we can be at times and say, well, they ain't paying me enough to do that. But if you agreed to do this level of work for this amount of pay, then they're paying you enough because you agreed to.
You agreed to it. Now, that being said, if there is truly something where there is a pay equity difference, like you find out that you're making $5 an hour, I'm just making numbers up, you're making $5 an hour and somebody else is making $15 an hour and y'all are doing the same job, that's a problem. And you should say something, right? If you find that out, you should say something, because therein lies an potentially pay equity issue that the company needs to fix, for sure. So don't just assume that everything is good. You want to make sure everything is good. You want to operate in good faith, and companies are generally operating in good faith. But, if you come across information that leads you to believe that things are not right, then say something. And I've had those conversations before with people who come to me and said, I found out that so-and-so is making this, and this is what I should be paying, and blah, blah, blah. And I go through a whole process with people. Here's the actual market rate for it. Here's what our rate is, and here's how we pay people. Here's the range. And based on your experience, blah, 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 this is where we placed you in the range.
And I was going to say, doesn't experience have something to do with it? Because even though you may be doing the same job, you
Right.
may have more experience.
Right. Experience does count. And that's what makes this a little hard right now when you talk about performance, because performance is also often tied to pay, and it's really tied to bonuses a lot, right? And that's why I say you're really responsible for your performance and responsible for your career. The challenge with pay equity right now, and the pay equity rules and pay equity practices, is the ability to make sure that there is pay equity, but also acknowledge a difference in experience and skill level. So if I have two people doing the exact same job, and this is I'm gonna explain this in a way that indicates why this is so complicated. I have two people doing the same job. One person is new; they maybe have 3 to 5 years of experience. The other person has 20. The person who makes 20 is making a whole lot more money than the person who is making, 15, or has 3 to 5 years of experience. Here's where pay equity becomes a problem. On the one side of the coin, if you can do the job with only 3 to 5 years of experience, is it really worth what you're paying the person who's got 20? Because more than likely, their pay has been increasing because of their time and their experience. But the job is commanding this amount of pay. So that's one side of the coin that would then lead you to say, we're going to have to redline this person's pay. In other words, they don't get any more increases because we are overpaying them for this job. So until the price of this job catches up with their pay, they don't get any more pay increases. They may get bonuses, right? So any merits or any normal pay increases they would get because they performed well may come in a lump sum or something. So that's one side of the coin. Same job. If you could do it at 3 to 5 years, that it's not worth a director level pay. But the other side of that coin is, yes, we got somebody who's got 3 to 5 years because we are doing succession planning. This person who's got 20, they're going to be out of here in a minute. We want to make sure we're bringing somebody up. And there's a level of complexity in this job that this level of experience does command more money because there is more breadth that they're able to do without supervision. So yes, this difference in equity makes sense. But both of those arguments are valid, which is why pay equity is so complicated. So give your HR people a break.
I would assume.
I see you, John. I'll answer in a minute.
I would assume that it would be depending upon the type of work, because when I think what you're saying, because I do productions, and I may get someone who's a national artist to come in, and somebody else is actually better. They're just less known.
Right.
But the national artist gets more because of
They're nationally known.
They're nationally known. But then when you really look at it, are they really selling the tickets and filling the seats?
Right.
Whereas the one that's less known is more hungry and going out there. So I've even had to change some things and say, no, it's not worth getting the nationally known artist just because of name recognition, because the point would mean your name should bring in seats.
Right.
So then I guess you look at it that way?
Right. So sometimes, I mean, it depends on the job. It depends on the industry. It depends on, there are so many things. It is not that, while there is science to compensation, there's a lot of art to compensation. And the key to good compensation practices is to be sure they're non-discriminatory. So whatever you're going to do, be consistent. So even if you're consistently wrong, at least you're consistent. So they may fine you because you were wrong, but they can't fine you because you discriminated, because you treated everybody the same. See what I mean? So I had a question here. Is hazard pay required or is it up to the employer? That's a really good question. There are some industries that may require hazard pay. Generally, hazard pay is something that is put into the compensation practices of an organization. So they will say, if you have to work a back-to-back 24-hour shifts, because of that impact to you as a person and the danger, and the risk to your safety, we're going to give you hazard pay. all the people that are now working in COVID, all our first responders. In many cases, the municipalities are saying, or even their hospitals or whatever, saying we're going to do hazard pay because they are taking undue risk to do their job. So it is not necessarily required everywhere. Now, for those who are in union contracts, there may be something in the union contract that requires hazard pay, and then you have to follow the letter of the union contract that requires hazard pay. But it is not necessarily an absolute requirement for it to be hazard pay.
Because I'm seeing now that there are people that are working in the grocery stores who are demanding and want hazard pay because we're still in a pandemic. And just because they opened the doors and allowing people to go back, so there's no legal way you can still get hazard pay if you're still in the midst of a crisis?
So I mean, there's legal ways to get paid hazard pay, but hazard pay is not a required part of pay. It is an optional part of pay. It is something that is used to recognize someone has been in an undue or hazardous situation, and you are recognizing that additional risk that they are taking, and you're paying them for that. But it is not necessarily required. It is sometimes standard. It'd be an industry standard or a company standard, right? Or a type of job standard. So you will see that where hazard pay is a standard type of pay, but it is not necessarily a legal requirement that you do hazard pay. So people that are like in grocery stores and things like that who are saying we should get hazard pay, and you're seeing some organizations come up and do that. They're doing it, like I think Kroger did it for a couple of months. Yeah. They gave extra pay because they recognized it, but that is not part of their regular compensation process. They decided we recognize that people are doing this, so we want to reward them by giving them additional hazard pay.
So whose responsibility is it, the employer or the employees, to make sure that they're in a safe work environment when it comes to what we're dealing with the pandemic? As you see at the grocery stores, they have the plexiglass up for the cashiers to make sure, and they make sure that they have on masks or whatever. Is that the employer's responsibility or the employee?
It is a dual responsibility.
Okay.
It is the employer's responsibility to provide an environment that is safe.
Okay.
If they're going to require, masks and everything to provide PPE, that's the employer's responsibility. It is the employee's responsibility to then use that PPE in the way it's supposed to be and to follow those rules. So I saw some kids, and I say kids because I really mean kids. I saw some kids at HEB the other day. They had masks on. They were on their chins.
Yeah.
Baby, just take the mask off. If you're going to do that, and the people that are running the store need to see that and say, that is not the appropriate performance management. That is not the behavior we expect. We expect you to wear a mask and to wear it properly, because the idea is to protect you as much as possible and minimize your risk. Nobody is saying that wearing a mask and everybody else wearing a mask is going to 100% prevent coronavirus. I have not seen that anywhere, although people try to make that out. I've not seen that anywhere. What the science says is that it minimizes risk. We are all about controlling risk at this point. It minimizes your risk of contracting coronavirus. If you have a risk and the people you're talking to have a risk, if you have a mask on and the people around you have a mask on, it's a risk minimization process.
You and I were just sitting here and I just watched somebody pass by the window. I said, now he has a mask on. Okay, but when I had to come out here this weekend, there was no mask and there was just, everybody hanging out.
Right.
So, as an employer, and you made that clear, this is what's necessary if you're going to be in here to make sure you're taking care of yourself so you can make sure you're taking care of others. I just had nothing else to say about it because I'm like, I know I made the right decision because you apparently don't get it. That it doesn't matter if you're going to put it on now. You've been walking around and going everywhere without one on. But is it legal that we can do that now? Because some people don't believe that corona is real. Some people don't believe that you have to have the mask on. Or, and as you said, I haven't read anywhere where it's going to prevent you. The young lady we had on the radio, she worked for the jail, and she made sure she had all her protective gear, but she still got it. So how can you make that?
Again, it is a risk minimization process.
Okay.
The risk of you contracting coronavirus, which is a respiratory illness, which the science has told us is respiratory. The wearing of a mask minimizes your ability to contract and your ability to spread. And that's the point. We got visitors. And so that's my girl V.
Oh, okay.
So we are not saying, and I have not read, other than just bots and stuff, that there is 100%, protection in any way right now. It is a respiratory illness. And so if you can find a way to prevent it, if you live with someone who is compromised, if you yourself are compromised, if there's a way for you to minimize risk, then you should. For employers, again, can make the decision about how they want their organization to run. We want people to wear masks. We don't want people to wear masks. We want them to wear masks at all times. You can wear masks. You have to wear masks in a common area. We're going to shut down our common areas. Organizations, depending on how they function, can make decisions about how you need to operate in their organization and what the rules are to come back to work. They can make those, as long as they are non-discriminatory. They can make those rules. And then you, as a person, as an individual, as an employee, can decide if you're okay with those. And if you are not, at least in Texas, we're an employment at will state. If you decide you are not, then you can find something else to do.
That's good.
And it's okay. I say that with zero judgment. Zero judgment. You got to be comfortable with what works for you. You just got to understand. What is that saying? You are free to make choices, but you are not free from the consequences of the choices you make. So make your choice. Make your choice. Just understand what it means, right? Understand what it means. And so businesses need to make the decisions that are the most important for them. Yeah, Leela just posted the Mayo Clinic has an article around masks and what they do and what they don't do. A Mayo Clinic article. I'll try to save that, Leela, and then I'll try to post it. Allergies, y'all.
See that?
Look, I am not Corona. 96.7 this morning.
Okay.
So it's really important, and not the temperature says anything anymore anyway, but it is really important that we understand from a performance perspective that your unwillingness to follow rules is a performance matter.
Yeah.
It is a performance matter. So those employees who are saying it's infringing upon my right, this is not what, I don't believe it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but you agreed to work at this organization. These are the rules for this organization, which means if you want to work here, these are the rules you have to follow. They're non-discriminatory. They're put in place not to cause pain. If you have some kind of issue that prevents you from wearing a mask, that's something else. That is a situation where you probably need to ask for a reasonable accommodation. Go talk to your HR person, talk to your supervisor. Hey, I got this going on. It prevents me from wearing a mask. Maybe I could just need to wear a shield, or maybe I need to work home longer or something like that. But then you need to ask about that.
That reminds me of a young lady I saw at Walmart some months ago when this first started, and she didn't have a mask on, and she said, "Oh, baby, I'm not gonna do that. I got asthma. I ain't the one." And then after that, she had a mask on, and she was just as happy walking around with the mask. So I don't know if they told her, okay, if that's an issue, you may not be able to work here, because she wears that mask proudly now.
It was probably that. That was probably one of the things. But if she has asthma, she's also compromised.
Yeah. So why?
So if you have asthma, I would think that the likelihood of you contracting corona and then you being one of the ones that has severe respiratory reaction to that would be heightened because you already got a compromised respiratory system. So I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense. But,
Because what we do know, it is, and that I've seen they've been sticking to this narrative, is that it helps the other person more than it helps you.
Yeah.
And people with underlying health issues suffer worse than those who may not have it.
And that's what we're really talking about here. We're not talking about healthy people. We're talking about those people who may be compromised. And Leela said many stores have up signs: no shirt, no shoes, no service. So why wouldn't they wear a mask too? Just saying.
That's good.
I like that. No shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service.
Because folks getting killed behind that though. Because
they're getting killed. Are crazy or getting beat up and stuff.
Yeah.
But I would say this. It isn't about us. Healthy people. It's not about healthy people, because just like every disability is not visible, every compromised person, it's not. You don't know which people are compromised and which ones aren't. You just don't know. Especially when you're just out in public. So it's a way to just do something for your fellow man or woman. or child. I'm just
Or
saying.
dog.
Or dog.
Yeah.
So performance management. I know we got off on all kinds of other stuff today, but it was really important. So performance management, it is the responsibility of the leader to be sure that expectations are clear, that conversations are had that are clear, and that they are timely. It is the responsibility of the employee to understand what the expectations are and to seek clarity if you're not clear, and to perform in a way that meets those expectations, or to have a conversation when you think they aren't going to be met. This is not a last minute, I'm not going to make that. You need to be proactive. So that's the show today. Because we got 2 minutes?
Good stuff.
1 minute. That's the show today. Don't forget, register to vote. Pay attention to when you have to vote. Register. You're going to have to register by mail or in person if your registrar's office is open. Some of them are opening up. I'm having the free webinar, taking the panic out of pandemic. That's on Thursday. It's free, but I need you to register so I know who's coming. I'll be opening up a resource and online thing soon. If you want to reach me, laurelrutledge.com, and just pick your path. If you want to talk to me about HR, you can click that. If you want to talk to me about personal stuff, your personal career stuff, click that. And just schedule a call. Calls are always free. The first call is always free. So just reach out. I'll be happy to do what I can to help. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you, New York. Thank you for all the questions today.
For the Rutledge Perspective coming up next. This is Laurel Rutledge. Stay tuned for the Rutledge Perspective
Well, you're not
coming
going
up next.
to. You're over. All right, thank you.